Chapter 18. When all these things have been said and considered, I am unwilling to contend about words, for such contention is profitable for nothing but the subverting of the hearer. But the law is profitable for edification if a man use it lawfully, for the end of the law is love out of a pure heart and a good conscience, and faith unfeigned. And our Master knew it well, for it was on these two commandments that he hung all the law and the prophets. And how would it harm me, O my God, thou light of my eyes in secret, if while I am ardently confessing these things, since many different things may be understood from these words, all of which may be true, what harm would be done if I should interpret the meaning of the sacred writer differently from the way some other man interprets? Indeed, all of us who read are trying to trace out and understand what our author wished to convey, and since we believe that he speaks truly, we dare not suppose that he has spoken anything that we either know or suppose to be false. Therefore, since every person tries to understand in the Holy Scripture what the writer understood, what harm is done if a man understands what thou, the light of all truth-speaking minds, showest him to be true, although the author he reads did not understand this aspect of truth, even though he did understand the truth in a different meaning? Chapter 19. For it is certainly true, O Lord, that thou didst create the heaven and the earth. It is also true that the beginning is thy wisdom in which thou didst create all things. It is likewise true that this visible world has its own great division, the heaven and the earth, and these two terms include all entities that have been made and created. It is further true that everything mutable confronts our minds with a certain lack of form, whereby it receives form, or whereby it is capable of taking form. It is true yet again that what cleaves to the changeless form so closely, that even though it is mutable it is not changed, is not subject to temporal process. It is true that the formlessness which is almost nothing cannot have temporal change in it. It is true that that from which something is made can, in a manner of speaking, be called by the same name as the thing that is made from it. Thus that formlessness of which heaven and earth were made might be called heaven and earth. It is true that of all things having form nothing is nearer to the unformed than the earth and the abyss. It is true that not only every created and formed thing, but also everything capable of creation and of form, were created by thee, from whom all things are. It is true, finally, that everything that is formed from what is formless was formless before it was created. Chapter 20. From all these truths, which are not doubted by those to whom thou hast granted insight in such things in their inner eye, and who believe unshakably that thy servant Moses spoke in the spirit of truth, from all these truths, then, one man takes the sense of "in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth" to mean, in his word, coeternal with himself, God made both the intelligible and the tangible, the spiritual and the corporeal creation. Another takes it in a different sense, that "in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth" means, in his word, coeternal with himself, God made the universal mass of this corporeal world, with all the observable and known entities that it contains. Still another finds a different meaning, that "in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth" means, in his word, coeternal with himself, God made the unformed matter of the spiritual and corporeal creation. Another can take the sense that "in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth" means, in his word, coeternal with himself, God made the unformed matter of the physical creation, in which heaven and earth were as yet indistinguished. But now that they have come to be separated and formed, we can now perceive them both in the mighty mass of this world. Another takes still a further meaning, that "in the beginning God created heaven and earth" means, in the very beginning of creating and working, God made that unformed matter which contained, undifferentiated, heaven and earth, from which both of them were formed, and both now stand out and are observable with all the things that are in them. Chapter 21. Again, regarding the interpretation of the following words, one man selects for himself, from all the various truths, the interpretation that "the earth was invisible and unformed, and darkness was over the abyss" means, that corporeal entity which God made was as yet the formless matter of physical things without order and without light. Another takes it in a different sense, that "the earth was invisible and unformed, and darkness was over the abyss" means, this totality called heaven and earth was as yet unformed and lightless matter, out of which the corporeal heaven and the corporeal earth were to be made, with all the things in them that are known to our physical senses. Another takes it still differently, and says that "but the earth was invisible and unformed, and darkness was over the abyss" means, this totality called heaven and earth was as yet an unformed and lightless matter, from which were to be made that intelligible heaven, which is also called the heaven of heavens, and the earth, which refers to the whole physical entity, under which term may be included this corporeal heaven. That is, he made the intelligible heaven from which every invisible and visible creature would be created. He takes it in yet another sense who says that "but the earth was invisible and unformed, and darkness was over the abyss" means, the scripture does not refer to that formlessness by the term heaven and earth, that formlessness itself already existed. This it called the invisible earth, and the unformed lightless abyss from which, as it had said before, God made the heaven and the earth, namely the spiritual and the corporeal creation. Still another says that "but the earth was invisible and formless, and darkness was over the abyss" means, there was already an unformed matter from which, as the scripture had already said, God made heaven and earth, namely the entire corporeal mass of the world, divided into two very great parts, one superior, the other inferior, with all those familiar and known creatures that are in them. Chapter 22. Now suppose that someone tried to argue against these last two opinions as follows. If you will not admit that this formlessness of matter appears to be called by the term heaven and earth, then there was something that God had not made out of which he did make heaven and earth. And Scripture has not told us that God made this matter unless we understand that it is implied in the term heaven and earth, or the term earth alone, when it is said, "In the beginning God created the heaven and earth." Thus in what follows, "the earth was invisible and unformed," even though it pleased Moses thus to refer to unformed matter, yet we can only understand by it that which God himself hath made, as it stands written in the previous verse, "God made heaven and earth." Those who maintain either one or the other of these two opinions, which we have set out above, will answer to such objections, "We do not deny at all that this unformed matter was created by God, from whom all things are, and are very good, because we hold that what is created and endowed with form is a higher good, and we also hold that what is made capable of being created and endowed with form, though it is a lesser good, is still a good. But the scripture has not said specifically that God made this formlessness, any more than it has said it specifically of many other things, such as the orders of cherubim and seraphim, and those others of which the apostle distinctly speaks, thrones, dominions, principalities, powers, yet it is clear that God made all of these. If in the phrase, "he made heaven and earth," all things are included, what are we to say about the waters upon which the Spirit of God moved? For if they are understood as included in the term earth, then how can unformed matter be meant by the term earth when we see the waters so beautifully formed? Or, if it be taken thus, why, then, is it written that out of the same formlessness the firmament was made and called heaven, and yet it is not specifically written that the waters were made? For these waters, which we perceive flowing in so beautiful a fashion, are not formless and invisible. But if they received that beauty at the time God said of them, "Let the waters which are under the firmament be gathered together," thus indicating that their gathering together was the same thing as their reception of form, what then is to be said about the waters that are above the firmament? Because if they are unformed, they do not deserve to have a seat so honorable, and yet it is not written by what specific word they were formed. If, then, Genesis is silent about anything that God hath made, which neither sound faith nor unerring understanding doubts that God hath made, let not any sober teaching dare to say that these waters were coeternal with God because we find them mentioned in the book of Genesis, and do not find it mentioned when they were created. If truth instructs us, why may we not interpret that unformed matter which the Scripture calls the earth, invisible and unformed, and the lightless abyss as having been made by God from nothing, and thus understand that they are not coeternal with him, although the narrative fails to tell us precisely when they were made? End of Book 12, chapters 12 to 22.